It's April 2024 and I'm about to cross the Ouse Viaduct, one of the most impressive features on the London to Brighton railway line, and the marker that I'm approaching my destination for the weekend, the West Sussex commuter town of Haywards Heath. Located 36 miles south of London, 13 miles south of Gatwick and 14 miles north of Brighton, the area of Haywards Heath is recorded as far back as 1261, though at the time it was used to describe an enclosed area of land rather than a settlement. And whilst Muster Green in the centre of town was the site of a minor battle in the First English Civil War, the settlement itself really only traces its history back to the arrival of the London and Brighton Railway in 1841. For just over 2 months, between the 12th of July and the 21st of September 1841, Haywards Heath Station was the southern terminus of the London to Brighton railway line, until Brighton Railway Station finally opened, a position it continues to hold on an almost indeterminable number of Sundays each year when engineering works closed the line south. In the early 1850s, the population of Haywards Heath was just 200, and that included Joseph Flesher, the contractor for the construction of this part of the London to Brighton railway line, who built his own house over the short tunnel that trains head through on their way south out of the station towards the coast. Today, the population, according to the 2021 census, stands at just over 40,000, with a large portion of that population commuting from the town to jobs in London, Brighton and at Gatwick Airport. Whilst Haywards Heath itself doesn't have a particularly long history, towards the northeast of the town, and now slowly being subsumed by the expanding town, is the village of Linfield, which does have a history going back at least as far as the 8th century. Though given the high street lies on an ancient north-south track that has existed for thousands of years, and not far from the Roman-built London to Brighton Way, it's possible its history may go back considerably further. Whilst Haywards Heath possesses no stately homes, gardens, museums or galleries of its own, its position makes it a great base to explore the many attractions that straddle the linguistically complicated North East West Sussex and North West East Sussex areas. Just 5 miles to the northwest of Haywards Heath, the National Trust owned Nymans. Located in the village of Handcross, the estate had existed since at least the Regency period, with a large Regency manor house sitting at the centre of the site. In 1890, Ludwig Ernst Wilhelm Leonard Messel had moved to the UK to settle and purchase the property, setting about transforming the estate into a place for family life and entertainment, and converting the Regency house into a German-style structure, assisted by his well-known German architect, and conveniently also his brother, Alfred Messel, who drew up the plans before handing them over to local builders to complete the construction work. From the beginning, the Messels invested in the gardens, with his head gardener helping to form large collections of plants in themed areas across the estate. Unfortunately for Ludwig, being a German of Jewish ancestry in England during the First World War, he was harassed relentlessly and was accused of using the towers of his house to conduct espionage, all unsubstantiated. But when he passed away in 1915, with the house and gardens passing to his son, Colonel Leonard Messel, and at the request of Leonard's wife Maud, the German-style house was renovated into a picturesque modern medieval stone manor in a late Gothic Tudor style. Much like his father, Leonard continued to invest in the gardens, extending the garden to the north and subscribing to seed collection expeditions to South America and the Himalayas. The gardens were incredibly popular and during the 1930s were regularly opened to the public to look around. Sadly, in 1947, a devastating fire ripped through the house, leaving it an empty shell and at the same time a deeply picturesque garden ruin. Leonard and Maud moved out of Nymans following the fire and purchased the nearby Horsted Manor as their new home. However, a small part of the house was rebuilt and became the home of Leonard Messel's daughter Anne and her second husband, Michael Parsons, the 6th Earl of Ross. On Leonard's death in 1953, the estate was bequeathed in his will to the National Trust, including 275 acres of woodland, making it one of the first gardens to be taken on by the Trust. Anne Ross continued to serve as the garden director, and following her husband's death in 1979, she returned to live at Nymans, continuing to retain some responsibility for the appearance of the gardens up until her death in 1992, marking over 100 years of involvement of the Messel family with Nymans. Today, the rooms of Nymans' house have been left as Anne would have remembered them. Sadly, Anne lived through another devastating event at the Gardens. On the night of the 15th of October 1987, one of the worst storms ever to hit the southeast of England passed through, leaving a trail of destruction through the home counties, Greater London and East Anglia. By the time the storm had passed, the gardens at Nymans had lost 486 mature trees and many of the shrubs. The Pinetum, one of the garden's earliest features, was totally destroyed. "37 years later, and whilst the gardens are as beautiful as they ever were, they are still areas where it's clear the trees, while still well established, are mere youngsters compared to what would have been there before." Today you can explore the whole of the estate, and in early April take in the wonderful blooms from the trees and spring planting. Wander to the edge of the estate and look out over the rolling landscapes of the high Sussex Weald. Or explore the various smaller sections of the garden, such as the Rose Garden, Rock Garden, Wild Garden, or the impressive Walled Garden. Just under 5 miles west of Nymans and close to the village of Ardingly, you reach Wakehurst. Today the estate occupies around 490 acres, with walled and water gardens, woodlands and wetland conservation areas. The estate of Wakehurst Place is built around the Tudor mansion, originally built around 1590 but altered many times. At the time of visiting, the mansion was undergoing major renovation, closing the building for several years, but providing an excellent viewpoint from the scaffolding over the grounds. The gardens were largely created by Gerald Loder, later the first Baron Wakehurst, who purchased the estate in 1903 and spent 33 years developing the gardens. After his death in 1936, the estate was purchased by Sir Henry Price, who continued to look after the gardens, allowing Loder's work to mature. Sir Henry died in 1963 and left the house and gardens to the nation, passing into the care of the National Trust. In 1965, the National Trust signed a long-term lease with the Royal Botanical Gardens Kew, who took over the estate and gardens as their out-of-town site and a location for their wild gardens and many of their tree species. Consequently, whilst this is a National Trust site and NT members get in for free, the site is managed by Kew, and members of Kew also get free entry. Just to add another charitable organisation into the mix alongside Kew and the Trust, the gardens are also home to the Wellcome Trust Millennium Building, which is home to the Millennium Seed Bank, the largest ex-situ plant conservation programme in the world. Unlike so many other Millennium projects in the UK, the Seed Bank actually did open its doors in the year 2000 to take on the work that had been started in Kew in 1980. The original aim of the Millennium Seed Bank was to collect and preserve the seeds of 10% of all known flora by 2010, which was achieved a year early in 2009. Today, the seed bank is home to over 2.4 billion seeds, representing almost 40,000 different species, including seeds from all of the UK's native flora. On a sunny spring day with the bluebells in full bloom, the gardens are a very tranquil and beautiful place to spend a few hours just wandering around. Away from the seed bank and the stately home, the rest of the estate houses important national collections of trees, including the National Birch Collection and the National Southern Beech Collection. As with Nymans, Wakehurst was devastated by the Great Storm of 1987, with some 20,000 trees toppled. In the reconstructing of the estate in the aftermath, Kew redesigned the gardens to create a walk through the temperate woodlands of the world, with species of trees from around the globe that can cope with the climate of the Sussex Weald. As well as creating some more fanciful areas where you can explore to discover the different uses for wood, willow and wicker. Turning to the southeast, 6.5 miles away across the border from West Sussex into East Sussex, lies yet another National Trust garden in Sheffield Park. Of the three estates, this is the one with the oldest pedigree, with the estate first being mentioned in the Domesday Book of 1086 as part of the lands of Pevensey, an area given by William the Conqueror to his half-brother Robert, Count of Mortain. Other than the 3rd Duke of Norfolk entertaining Henry VIII here in August 1538, little more is known about the estate until 1769, when it was sold to aspiring politician John Holroyd. 12 years later, he was elevated to a baronetcy, adopting the name Baron Sheffield, and with that his estate became known as Sheffield Place. Holroyd spent a fortune on his house and estate, employing James Watt as his architect to remodel the house and Lancelot Capability Brown to lay out the gardens. The house remained in the Holroyd family for 3 generations until the 3rd Earl of Sheffield, Henry Holroyd. Henry remained unmarried his whole life, so on his death the estate was sold rather than being inherited. After having visited Sheffield Park in 1899 and taking a liking to it, Arthur Gilstrap Soames purchased the estate in 1909 and continued large-scale planting, as well as carrying out renovations and improvements to the house, including adding plumbing and heating. Upon Arthur Gilstrap Soames' death in 1934, the mansion and estate went to his nephew Arthur Granville Soames. During the Second World War, the house was requisitioned by the government and thousands of troops were posted to Sheffield Park, with Nissen huts sited through the gardens and woods. In 1942, the house and gardens became the headquarters for the Royal Canadian Artillery, whilst the local Home Guard also trained in the park. 6 years of military use took its toll on the building, and whilst the younger Arthur Soames attempted to restore the house, he ultimately gave up on it and sold the estate to a property company in 1953. More interested in the house than the grounds, the property company were happy to sell 200 acres of the land to the National Trust the following year, an acquisition that was only limited by the funds that were available to the Trust at the time of the purchase. 53 years later, the Trust was able to purchase another 250 acres of the site in 2007. The house itself remains in private ownership and isn't open to the public, but the gardens are open to look around and admire the work of Capability Brown and the Soameses. The gardens are home to the National Collection of Ghent azaleas. As well as some stunning views back to the house. And the beautiful landscaping around the ponds and water features of the park, which in early April were full of blooms and bluebells. Just over half a mile away from Sheffield Park Gardens, there's a very different type of bluebell. This one a bit more metallic and steamy. Today, Sheffield Park Railway Station is the southern terminus of the Bluebell Railway, the first preserved standard gauge steam-operated passenger railway in the world to operate a public service. The Society ran its first train on the 7th of August 1960 from Sheffield Park Station to Bluebell Halt, located just 100 yards south of Horsted Keynes Station. The only reason they didn't run all the way into Horsted Keynes was because British Railways were still running electric trains from Horsted Keynes to Ardingly and Haywards Heath. The line from East Grinstead through Horsted Keynes to Sheffield Park and on to Lewes having only finally closed on the 17th of March 1958. Less than 3 years from closure as a public railway to reopening as a heritage railway is probably quicker than it would be possible even today. The closure of the line actually took place before the beaching cuts of the 1960s, so it's always a little unfair to point out that the railway butcher, Dr. Richard Beeching, happened to live in East Grinstead and kept his railway connection to London. As the first station of the railway, Sheffield Park is home to the line's small museum, as well as its engine sheds, and one of the main places people start their journeys, though its public transport connections aren't great, with only a limited weekend bus service during summer months from Lewes. Bluebell Halt probably also holds the record for the first ever heritage railway station to itself be closed, with a line extending north into the platforms of Horsted Keynes in 1962, just a year before British Railways finally withdrew the service from Horsted Keynes to Haywards Heath. Having lost its railway connection to Haywards Heath, today only hourly buses on a Saturday and a handful of buses on a Sunday connect the station to the wider world, but from Haywards Heath, Horsted Keynes is still the most convenient station to start an exploration of the line from. For a heritage railway, this is a big station, befitting its original role as a junction on lines that at one time created a spider's web of railways across East Sussex and into Kent. There are 5 platforms, albeit platform 4 and 5 serving the same track, with the station acting as a main centre of operations for the line. In the morning, before the first passenger trains arrive, engineering trains are still running through the station. The station is also home to the extensive carriage works, where the rolling stock of the railway is maintained, with everything from light cleaning through to full rebuilds of historic first-generation carriages taking place on site. I caught the first train of the morning that had started at Sheffield Park, north in the direction the railways had always wanted to go, but took quite a long time to achieve.
East Grinstead service. All passengers please stand back on the platform edge and wait for the train to come to a complete stand before attempting to board. 10:47 to East Grinstead, now approaching platform 3.
After the initial burst of work opening the line from Sheffield Park to Horsted Keynes, it would be another 32 years of extensive fundraising, land and freehold acquisitions before another extension would open, with the line making it back to Kingscote station in April 1994. Work to achieve this extension included the relaying of track through the 731-yard-long Sharp-Thorn Tunnel, the longest tunnel on a UK heritage railway. Kingscote station was always only a stopgap, with the railway harbouring ambitions to make it all the way back to the national railway network at East Grinstead, a feat which it's finally achieved on March the 7th, 2013, 10 days in advance of the 55th anniversary of the line's original closure. With a connection through to the national railway network, it is possible for trains from the Bluebell railway to continue on north towards London, though this rarely happens. Instead, trains terminate in a separate platform a couple of hundred yards from the mainline station, with their connections back to London Victoria. Haywards Heath sits on the Brighton main line with frequent services from both Southern and Thameslink north towards Gatwick Airport in around 15 minutes and London Victoria or London Bridge in around 45 minutes. Thameslink services also provide connections through to London St Pancras for Eurostar services to Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam, Luton Airport Parkway for connections to Luton Airport, Bedford and Cambridge. South trains head towards Brighton and Sussex coast destinations. London Gatwick Airport is the UK's second largest airport with connections across Europe, Africa, Asia and North America. And London Luton, the UK's fifth busiest airport, is a major centre for European low-cost carriers, home to EasyJet and a hub for Wizz and Ryanair.